On This Week in Enterprise Tech, VMware tosses a Hail Mary, communicating at the speed of light and securing your point of sale. Twy it on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twy it, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 175, recorded January 28, 2016, or February 5th, 2016. Securing Point of Sale. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Igloo Software. Igloo is an internet you'll actually like. It connects people with the information they need to do their best work. Try it for free at igloosoftware.com/twit or sign up for a live demo to see it in action. And by the Ring Video Doorbell. With Ring, you can see and talk to anyone at your door from anywhere in the world using your smartphone. It's like caller ID for your house. Right now, get free expedited FedEx shipping when you go to ring.com/enterprise. And by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/twyit. Welcome to Twy it, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise, but I'm not guiding you by myself. I've got my co-hosts, my good friends, starting with Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii, who is joining us today even though he has the plague. Brian, you're not dead yet, are you?
No, not quite, but I'm hacking up all kinds of really nasty stuff that just shouldn't be mentioned on the air.
So this is sort of This Week in Biomed Tech. I like it. We're going to leave you alone there, so hopefully you can slowly decompose in peace. But let's go ahead and bring in our other co-host, Mr. Lou Maresca. That's right. He joined our merry band at the start of the year. He's a senior development lead with Microsoft. Lou, good to have you on the show. You're not sick, are you?
You know, I'm just getting over it, but it's that time of year, so I feel for Brian.
Yeah, I really, you know, the strange thing is I did not catch the CES sickness, but that was because I was sick before I went to CES. I think my virus like fought with the CES virus, and well, that's what we got. Well, gentlemen, we've got an action-packed show because later on we're going to be bringing in Travis Smith from Tripwire, who's going to be explaining how SMB networks are being exploited to break into point-of-sale systems. So we've got a hot topic, but before we do that, let's go ahead and jump into the blips. This first one is all about one of our favorite, not favorite, kind of favorite, could be favorite topics, the Internet of Things. Now, with the Internet of Things projected to hit $1.5 billion by the end of 2016 and $13.5 billion by the end of 2020, more and more companies are angling their resources to bolster their IoT portfolios and get in early. Sony is no exception to that rule. The consumer tech giant just purchased Israel-based Altair Semiconductor in a $212 million deal that gives Sony the wherewithal to connect everything to the internet. Altair is known for their LTE chipsets, and that field is a bit crowded. But it seems that what Sony was most interested in was their 4G 1150-6401 microcontrollers, which enable low bitrate link speeds up to 1 megabit per second while consuming practically no power in standby. Furthermore, Altair has been rolling out chips with low-power MCU subsystems that allow for hardware-based security, a definite differentiator among providers of the Internet of Things. With the acquisition, Sony is now set to securely connect everything in their portfolio from wearables, smart meters, consumer electronics, lighting, appliances, and their new enterprise-aimed drones.
Tesla move over autonomous shuttles surface in the Netherlands. This week, there's already public transportation that runs on rails by themselves, but the new driverless vehicles called WePods can drive the Dutch public roads, integrating themselves with normal traffic. WePods can transport 6 individuals almost 7 miles between railway station and university. Over the coming months, the project will expand to longer distances as they produce data to learn from the current experiences. The vehicles won't have a driver, but will be monitored from a remote control room to ensure their functioning safety. There's even a backup plan if the WePod's self-driving abilities don't work out. A joystick will be installed. So if you're one of those people that are riding there, you might want to brush up on your flight simulator expertise just so you can steer the riders to safety.
Oracle is finally pulling the plug on the Java browser plugin. In a long expected announcement, Oracle is finally deprecating the Java browser plugin and putting us out of our misery. It has long been a product that has created millions of orphan other products, and probably one of the largest reasons why users are still hanging on to things like Windows XP. Heck, my AT&T tests still don't run very well on anything other than XP, and it's only because of those stupid Java browser plugins.
VMware has announced the future of their cloud services, and it might be other vendors' clouds. In their latest earnings call, VMware CEO Pat Gelsinger announced 2015 was a rough year for the virtualization company and announced that VMware would be undergoing a restructuring that would see the layoff of 800 employees, change to adapt the planned EMC-Dell merger, and putting on of the brakes of their investment in VMware's vCloud Air public cloud platform. The tone of the presentation was that virtualization has matured and VMware must now look to innovate their ability to interoperate. Specifically, he said, we will be introducing a new NSX offering which will enable customers to create secure and encrypted overlay networks across public clouds, including AWS and Azure on-premise. Coupled with the announcement they were scaling back investment in their own cloud services, it would seem that VMware's new focus will be to push hybrid public-private cloud solutions, even if those solutions don't live on VMware's platform. This is a bold departure from the siloed approach VMware is most known for and could be the key to expanding NSX, the singular bright spot in VMware's newish offerings. Though it will be interesting to see how NSX stacks against Microsoft's Azure Stack, which might arguably out-VM VMware.
Walmart doing open source software? This week, the Arkansas-based global retailer decided to step into the open space arena by posting on GitHub their OneOps platform. OneOps is a platform for building and launching cloud-based applications across varied environments and platforms. The main selling point of OneOps is for businesses is that it lets organizations switch between different providers easily to take advantage of changes in pricing, features, and scalability. Meanwhile, for developers, it means it's easier to build and deploy cloud apps in a vendor-agnostic way. It offers a way to deploy apps on different platforms like Microsoft Azure, Rackspace, CenturyLink public clouds, to private or hybrid environments built using OpenStack. Why open source a proprietary platform? Well, Walmart states it makes sense for Walmart to release OneOps as an open source project so that the community can improve or build ways for it to adapt for existing technology. Walmart seems to get the true power of open source, so let's root for them for once.
Workstation VMware may become the latest orphan in the merger wars. It's sad, but EMC seems to have laid off the bulk of their Type 2 hypervisor team, aka VMware Fusion and VMware Workstation. It would seem that EMC is going to concentrate on bare metal hypervisors like ESXi and have laid off their workstation-based virtualization teams. A very sad day indeed, since a great number of people use VMware Workstation and VMware Fusion to provide cross-platform compatibility testing and prototyping.
Hey, here's a switch. The EFF wants the NSA to keep their spy data. For more than a decade, the EFF has been fighting a furious battle against the data collection agencies of the U.S. government. They've been fantastically passionate about stopping the mass surveillance and metadata storage tactics of the NSA and championed the USA Freedom Act, which passed in June of 2015 and put an end to 14 years of phone record collection. So it was an interesting change to see them petition a court to force the NSA to keep the collected data. In an open letter to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court, or FISA Court, the EFF expressed their desire to, quote, open a dialogue about destroying the records while documenting what is in the records in order to support the EFF's 2 active cases against the U.S. government, unquote, over said data collection. In other words, while the EFF is quite happy that the records are being destroyed, they're convinced that the records document criminally negligent acts in the initial collection. While the EFF has a good point, it also means that the NSA can hold and potentially use the records until the court cases and appeals are done, which could potentially drag out for decades. So, who knows? Now the EFF might be working against you. Well, that does it for the blips. Next thing, we're going to jump into the bytes. Specifically, we want to look at 2 new communications technologies that seem to aim at the consumers, but do have enterprise confrontation issues for those people who network. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about the first sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's Igloo. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you remember when your corporate intranet was cool and new all those years ago? I mean, it was great, right? It was like your own private internet, all your data in all the right places with everything at your fingertips. Well, no matter how good it might be, today, your corporate internet probably feels like the web from the 1990s. That's right. It's just not good anymore. It's not responsive. It's not what we've come to expect, which is why we're happy to have Igloo as a member of the Twiat Write It. Now, Igloo is an intranet that you'll actually like. It's a cloud portal that enables you to share files, collaborate on documents, blog updates, coordinate calendars, and manage projects all from the same attractive and intuitive interface. Igloo leverages the best part of the intranet, important enterprise-specific data at your fingertips and what people have come to expect from the internet social. Igloo gives your user comments, like buttons, and the ability to add content based on their permissions with drag-and-drop widgets and a WYSIWYG editor. Of course, a beautiful and intuitive interface isn't very useful if your users can't access it on the devices that they're actually using. That's why Igloo is built with responsive design. It automatically reformats to your phone or your tablet as well as to your laptop or your desktop. It's also customizable. SharePoint, Salesforce, Active Directory, and soon Dropbox and Box can all live inside your Igloo. That means it gives it a branded look and feel. You don't have to feel like you're jumping onto someone else's service. Now it all looks like it's part of your built-in intranet, your built-in tools. How about security? I know security is a sore subject for a lot of folks in IT. Well, what about SSL and 256-bit encryption baked into a variety of access, authentication, and identity services to ensure that only your authorized users have access to the system and only those users who need access to the most sensitive data get the access that they need? Now, Igloo offers plans starting as low as $3 per month per user, and unlike other solutions, you get full access to their entire suite of tools for one price. No more upselling or trotting out a few features and demanding more money for what you really need. Volume pricing is available, and it's used by government agencies and companies like Hulu, Inventive Health, American Family Insurance, and IP Switch. Don't you think that you should use Igloo too? Now, here's what we want you to do. We want you to sign up now and try it for free at igloosoftware.com/twit. That's igloosoftware.com/twit. And when you sign up through our link, you can get your own Igloo for up to 10 people absolutely free for as long as you want. That's right. Keep it. Keep it. Why not try it? With 10 people, you can see if Igloo might change the way that you work today. That's igloosoftware.com/twit. igloosoftware.com/twit. And we thank Igloo for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Brian, Lou, let's go ahead and talk about some new connectivity options. There have been a couple that have popped up over the last couple of weeks, and it's interesting because even though they are consumer pieces of technology, I could definitely see them spreading into enterprise deployments. The first one is all about millimeter wave radio. Now, this popped up last week because the former CEO of Aereo, do you remember Aereo, the company that made those dime-sized antennas and tried to convince the world that they weren't rebroadcasting content, they were simply allowing users to rent an antenna that was stored in a really good position to receive over-the-air transmissions. You remember that, right? The CEO was a man by the name of Chee Kanogia, and his team came up with the technology, dime-size arrays of antennas, and essentially you could rent an antenna and then receive any of the content that rented antenna might receive. Cheebert, were you ever an Aereo subscriber?
No, unfortunately, it never came to Honolulu. I was very curious and wanted to try it, but unfortunately, my market wasn't important enough to Chet.
I will say this. It was available in New York, and you needed a New York address in order to be able to rent an antenna. And someone that I might know who maybe wanted to really try the service because he has access to lots of addresses all over the world, did get the service and used it when he was in California, maybe living there at a Jesuit residence. And he used it, and it was actually fantastic. It was fabulous. The ability to look at over-the-air programming made me really realize there's a lot of stuff that goes out for free that you don't actually need a cable subscription for. And so when the Supreme Court struck it down, it was a bit of a disappointment. But Lou, the big point here was that Aereo was a disruptive technology, even though eventually the Supreme Court struck it down and said, no, it is rebroadcasting, and that killed the company. What was your take on what Aereo did to the broadcast industry?
I think it's one of those things. I know I used Aereo, and I live up in the mountains, so I don't get over the air, and I was super disappointed. And you're right, it was really good. It had like its own like DVR type functionality too. It was really kind of cool. But I think what it did is it just showed the two parts. It showed the public that as a disruptor, there can be things that fill the gaps for people who need it, and then it shows kind of like people that broadcasting the networks and so on can sometimes take away that capability. And so I think these things that he's coming up with are kind of shifting markets and making people think about specific scenarios. And I think that's super important, especially for small startups and companies to do.
Very well said. And actually, that's exactly why we're talking about it today, because Chet is back, and he's back with another idea that could potentially be disruptive to a related industry. It's no longer the broadcast industry. It's now the internet service provision industry. He has a new company called Starry, S-T-A-R-R-Y. And just like Aereo, it's set to disrupt a major entrenched industry. Now, here's how it works. He says they're going to install what they call Starry beams, which are really just nodes. They allow for the retransmission of data on rooftops throughout a city. So we're talking about highly packed, very, very dense areas. Now, each of these installations is able to reach 2 kilometers, according to them. Customers who are interested in using the service will install what they call Starry points outside of their windows that link to the Starry beams with millimeter wave radios. Now, Cheebert, a lot of the geeks who were reading the story we got to that point when they said millimeter wave radios, and then a lot of us just sort of stopped and started shaking our head. Why is it that we don't necessarily trust technology for delivering over long distances based on millimeter wave radios?
Millimeter wave radio, well, one, the smaller the beam, the more energy it takes to move that beam through the air. When you start getting down to wavelets that are tiny, 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 millimeter and so forth, let's put it this way. I actually have direct experience with a 65 gigahertz radio that they use on the Sony Open, and they use it specifically to get from, say, like the 7th hole of the Sony Open out to the broadcast truck, and they need very high speeds to get that full raw HD. At 65 gigahertz, oxygen molecules start bumping into the waves, so you start getting a lot of degradation. So that means Aereo is going to have to put a lot of energy into this. Now, I was getting ready to really poo-poo this and say, well, not a chance. This is not going to work, until I spotted one little sentence. The antennas are outside the window. That changes the equation dramatically, because now all of a sudden line of sight or near line of sight is very, very possible, because one of the huge advantages of millimeter radio is you just need a sliver of clear air. You don't need a big chunk of air to get through. So that means an alleyway, or space between a couple of chimneys, or space between 2 houses at an angle is enough. So I'm going to change my mind. I'm actually thinking that maybe Chet has a thing here, especially if in each city he can rent rooftop space high enough that he gets the angles to be able to go and get line of sight or near line of sight to all his potential customer base. So I'm going to predict that this one might actually work. And Chet, give me a yell, because I've got a project where I need to do lots and lots of internet on the island of Molokai, and one of your towers should handle the entire island, and maybe we can get some utility money to help you get started.
We've got Bleak in the chat room who's saying, oh, that pesky oxygen. Yeah, it's always getting in the way. Now, you got to remember, millimeter wave technology, millimeter wave radios are so named because they operate on extremely, extremely high frequency. We're talking 30 to 300 gigahertz. Imagine that when Wi-Fi is 2.4 to 5.8 gigahertz. This is 30 to 300. So the wavelengths go from 1 millimeter to 10 millimeters. That's why it's called millimeter wave radio. So I would compare that to what you might have for a radio station, an FM radio station, where a wavelength could literally be the size of a tunnel. This are tiny, tiny, tiny beams, which, as Cheebert said, takes a lot of power to make sure that they get to their destination, because they do get attenuated by things like oxygen, and they get completely blocked by any walls. These are very, very line of sight. In fact, one of the issues that people have is that rain, when it rains, that kills millimeter. Millimeter can't penetrate rain. So they're going to need some special sauce for that. But it also means that you can make an incredibly directional signal. This is not shotgunning the signal. You can directly aim it if you've got good antenna technology, and that's the key. Aereo was good antenna technology. That's what they built. They have a way of making tiny, tiny antennas that they can use in some sort of array. Lou, knowing all this, what Cheebert's been talking about, knowing about the technological challenges, this is a solution that would be horrible, horrible for suburban areas where you have things that are spread out. But for cities like Seattle, cities like San Francisco, New York, this actually could be competitive, right? Especially since one of the guesses that the analysts have is these are actually going to mesh. You're going to have nodes that will be redundant because as long as you can get to one and one can get to another, you can actually route around any faults or attenuations in signal.
Yeah, if you get the clearance in cities, especially large cities, I think it's definitely going to take off. I think you mentioned Seattle. I know we rain so much here, and like you said, if they don't have some special type of technology to kind of vary through the rain or even the fog, I don't think it's going to be able to come in this area. But I know areas that, like San Francisco or areas like New York or Chicago, these are places that could probably, especially if they can get the clearance for very, very tall antennas, I think it definitely could take off. And people who pay enough for internet and they're usually kind of stuck with specific providers, I think if they can take this off, people will definitely jump on it. Just like people with Aereo or wanted Aereo, they don't want to have to put up their own antennas. They just pay $3-4 a month for some streaming. They could do it on their phone or whatever. It makes for an easy market. So I think he'll definitely get some people to jump on it right away. Whether it takes off, it all depends on how good it is. So I think there's some. I'm sure hopefully they'll be able to demo it soon so we can see what's going on.
Right. Kara, we actually have the site, so if you could bring the site for Starry up, that'd be nice. One of the other things we should mention, and this is where the enterprise side of me gets really, really excited. We've spoken with people who are in the broadband industry. Specifically, we spoke with the CEO of Sonic.net, and he mentioned that in San Francisco, it costs $5,000 per house that you deploy to, even if you don't deploy to it. So if you go past the house, that's going to cost you $5,000 to get fiber. In New York, the estimate was closer to $2,500. It's city politics. But what Chet is saying is because you can bypass a lot of those politics, you can drop the deployment fee from $2,500 or $5,000 down to $25 per house. And again, this is in a dense cityscape. So in that sense, this is a very, very attractive, especially if you can make it fault tolerant, way to expand your enterprise communications. Cheebert, I mean, would this work in mesh? These are going to be semi-expensive. They're about $400 each if you want to reserve one of these now. And actually, the interface does look pretty cool. I mean, it gives you a lot of statistics about the health, about how it's doing, about what kind of throughput that you're going to get. But do you see this kind of technology being expanded beyond the consumer base?
Oh yeah, totally. Let's use an example. I was actually looking at trying to bring in new internet into our battery test facility for the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. And every single provider all made me eat a very large number to get basically 20 feet of fiber optics run from the street into my facility. And so well, of course, if you buy, make a 5-year commitment, we'll amortize that installation cost. It's like, no, dude, you're killing me. We actually said we're going to go LTE because you guys are way too expensive. Now, this gives me the best of both worlds because we have a frequency that is high enough that we can send an awful lot of data in a very, very short amount of time. So I believe his numbers. And if he's actually going to put enough power behind those transmitters, this could get very, very interesting very, very quickly. In fact, this is interesting enough that I think I'm actually going to throw some money in his direction just so that I can go and encourage him to come to the Honolulu market.
I know. I was actually, because he's going for New York first, which that's actually a good point. I understand why he's doing that. And we're talking about block by block, region by region deployment. I want to see how fast he can roll this out. As soon as it makes it to San Francisco, I'll sign up. But what I'm guessing is he's probably not going to be able to serve where I am in San Francisco because I live in the Sunset area, which is, compared to downtown, very, very spread out. Again, I think this is a high-density technology. We'll see. let's go ahead and move on to the second technology I want to talk about. I'm sorry.
I do want to say one thing fast, though. I don't think it's going to necessarily need high density things, because remember, it's all about line of sight. So he could put up a smaller antenna array and cover a large portion of the Sunset District without having to put as high a density of antennas. So I think this actually scales both upward and downward.
Right.
And especially with the mesh technology, it means you could probably do a bank shot off your neighbor if, say, for instance, a moving truck is in the way. So I think this has a lot of promise.
I'd also like to see if the technology grows to the point where it could fulfill what we thought we were going to do with Wi-Fi back in the early 2000s. Remember when we all thought that we could start creating a mesh where all of us could take whatever fast networking connection we have and share it with our neighbors and make a really fault-tolerant regional network. With millimeter wave, if their technology is as robust as they say it is, maybe we could finally make that a reality. Let's move away from millimeter wave and move to optical wireless networking. Because, Cheebert, I know that you've been playing with this, so I want to get you in here. You're like a kid in the candy store. A few weeks back, there was a story about how some people who had been poking around in the latest modules in iOS had found a reference to Li-Fi capability. Now, Li-Fi is like Wi-Fi, but it's with optical light. It's with visible light. Now, optical wireless communications is not new. We have been playing it for a while. This is pure Li-Fi. It's the first company to release a commercial product for Li-Fi. We've been using invisible light communication technology for years, using point-to-point bridges that use UV or near IR light. Visible light communication technology uses a 390 to 750 nanometer band. Invisible light communication technology uses 200 to 280 or 750 to 1600 nanometers. Invisible light can offer data rates in excess of 10 gigabits per second per wavelength that you use. So you could stack these and get some truly impressive bandwidth, some throughputs. Now, the range of this new optical wireless technology is, well, quite simply, it's incredible. You can go from chip to chip. You can do WPANs, which is wireless personal area networks. You could do medium range. That's like WLANs. It's the closest analogy to Wi-Fi. Long range in between buildings, and ultra long range. In fact, and Kara, I think we have a link for this. In 2013, NASA created a network that was capable of beaming data to and from the moon at 622 megabits per second. So this is very, very flexible technology. Cheebert, you've been using optical networking since I knew you. What are the advantages of using, say, like a laser bridge?
Well, the huge advantage. So let's put on different hats. First off, in the clandestine world, lasers are great because unless you're right in front of it, right in line, you're not going to be able to tap it. So on the consumer side, that also means that if you don't have anything in between, you get some really nice bandwidth and like just works. You know, we've been using point-to-point lasers forever. A lot of satellites actually use to get around this problem of having to hop up and down, up and down, up and down from Earth station to satellite. Is a lot of satellites now can do sideways bank shots from satellite to satellite in orbit instead of having to go all the way back down again. So that's really cool. Now, the downside to Li-Fi in general, I've actually been tinkering with this for laboratory equipment, is that shiny objects will diffract and bounce this light all over the place. And so you end up having to do a lot of error correction because of the bouncing effect. I want to see what they do about that. I haven't seen anything in their brag sheets or anything in their white papers on how they're going to deal with all the reflectivity, especially in a modern home when it's now very posh to do stainless steel and glass and all that kind of good stuff, and all these wonderful shiny surfaces that are going to wreak havoc, especially when we start dealing with these types of frequencies that get attenuated very nicely by smoked glass, gets bounced around very nicely by stainless steel. It's going to be really, really interesting. And I'm not going to hold my breath yet. I think you're going to end up with, having to put like a desktop-looking lamp, and on the lamp is going to have to be the Li-Fi receiver, and then wired or maybe a tiny hotspot.
Right, right. Lou, let's jump back to some of the technical stuff. What are the advantages of a Li-Fi system?
So, you know, one of the advantages obviously is the fact that you can get up the massive speeds, right? So you can get the 224 gigabyte per second or whatever, and you can actually do from medium to long range and so on and so forth. And it's just using just standard light, right? So you're switching on LEDs on and on, off and on, really high speeds, and you know, human eyes can't detect it, and you kind of get that capability. And it eventually should be cheaper than Wi-Fi if you think about it, because then obviously you're just using LEDs in that case. And also the fact that, you know, the current Wi-Fi, now we're not talking about, I think it's what the new Wi-Fi Halo is going into the 900 megahertz band, but with this specific technology stays away from the current 2.5 and 5.8 gigahertz range that's currently saturated. So, you know, if you can stay away from these bands, and you could definitely get a certain amount of density when it comes to speed and reliability. So I think there's some promise, I think, to this a little bit.
Right, right. And also the fact that the usable spectrum inside of one single transmission link of Li-Fi is actually more than the usable spectrum that's available to all of Wi-Fi. I mean, it's mind-boggling, especially since you can make it directional. So you could have two devices that are this close to each other, and it would be as if they had a wired connection. They're not really interfering with one another. So the promise is there. But the product that we have right now, the first commercial product, is from True Li-Fi, and it does 11.4 megabits per second. So it's not, or megabytes per second. It's not the fastest thing in the world. It's decent for a first effort, but I do want to see how it develops. Remember, it was first out the gate at Mobile World Congress in 2014. The IEEE body is doing a good job of creating some standards that companies can use to create Li-Fi products. But Chee, what do you think? When does this become a usable enterprise class deployment? Do you have to have a big name like Cisco saying, hey, we're now going to make access points that can interoperate with these lights that you can screw in and get access where you can't get Wi-Fi? So
I think the Li-Fi guys are actually going for the wrong market. If they want to get into the enterprise market where the money really is, they need to get away from the kitschy little, you know, controlling the lights and things like that. You know, that's fine, the consumer market, but there's hardly any profit there. The enterprise market, where you want to do it, is you want to be able to go and do fast deploys or fast redeploys of cubicle farms, your so-called boiler rooms, your group huddle rooms. You want to be able to go and very quickly set up and rearrange and drop a receiver, say, for instance, or repeater in the middle of a set of cubes, say like at the cross point. And that way you can go, all you have to do is just plug your cubicles into a grid of power and go. That, I think, is where Li-Fi has a lot of promise. I think it also has a lot of promise on getting across alleyways, getting across little causeways, you know, trying to get bypass. I think that's where Li-Fi has actually got a lot more potential, and also potential for keeping the profit margins high enough to support what is in essence a relatively high support type of product.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited. I am going to be at Mobile World Congress this year, and there are a couple of companies that are showing off some Li-Fi enabled devices, mobile devices. And supposedly I should be able to pick one up and just walk through a booth and get access, even though I'm going to be in an incredibly dense networked area, which, as you know, Cheeber, doesn't really work well for any kind of wireless, even 5.8 gigahertz. So if they can make that work, it will prove the use case to me. Besides, who doesn't like the idea of LEDs flashing really, really quickly? Yeah, it's blinky. I love blinky. Well, gentlemen, I do want to get to our guest because he has some very important information for anyone who might be dealing with point-of-sale systems. If you're worried about getting breached, if you're worried about potentially exposing your customers' information, you're going to want to be here after the break. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank the second sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's got to be the Ring Video Doorbell. Now, anyone who's watched me on the Twit TV network knows that this is a product that I actually purchased before they became a sponsor of Twit TV, because I was a little worried about my parents. My parents are retired. They're in an area with a lot of retirees, and we were getting a lot of burglaries in the area, people who would basically ring the bell, see if someone was out, and then know that they have a couple of hours to burglarize the place. Very, very distressing to me because I want to take care of my parents. They took care of me. Well, the Ring Video Doorbell is a product that could really bring you peace of mind. Here's how it works. You install the Ring Video Doorbell, and it has inside this kit, it's got all the things that you need to be able to do it, from the drill bit to the level to the charging cable. You can run it off of house power if you've got a current bell going to where you want to mount the Ring, or you could just charge the internal lithium-ion battery, and it's good for about a year. Now, once it's connected, it uses a motion sensor and a high-definition camera to automatically start recording what might be happening in front of your house. Now, this is how it works for us. Someone rings the doorbell, and my parents on their phones, on both of their phones, they will actually get a notification that someone's at the door. They can answer that call and start a two-way conversation, complete with video, so that they can speak to that person who might be able to be scared off by the fact that someone is responding to the doorbell. This is what the solution looks like. So here is my phone with the same application for my parents' home in Las Vegas. What this allows me to do is I can see all the times that the Ring Video Doorbell was triggered, and then it has video of what was happening when it was triggered. I can see if a package was delivered. I could see if someone was stopping by to drop off a newspaper. I could see if it's the same person who's dropped by 3 days in a row and started peering through the windows, even if they don't ring the video doorbell. This is what the Ring Video Doorbell does. It makes your house smarter, and it gives you a window into what happens when you're not there. Folks, why not try the Ring Video Doorbell today and see if it can give you a peace of mind? Try the device that both Time Magazine and USA Today called one of the best gadgets of 2015. The Ring Video Doorbell is something that will truly change your house into a home. Put your mind at ease and protect your home with the Ring Video Doorbell. Again, go to ring.com/enterprise. That's ring.com/enterprise for free expedited FedEx shipping. Once more, that's ring.com/enterprise. With Ring, you're always home. And we thank Ring for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. We now welcome to the show Mr. Travis Smith. He is the Senior Security Researcher at Tripwire. Travis, thank you very much for coming on to This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, you've been working on a very important report that has been making the rounds recently, talking about the exploitation of point-of-sale systems on small to medium business networks. Now, how widespread is this problem?
It's incredibly widespread. I mean, you see point-of-sale systems all over the place in your daily lives. You know, anything from a grocery store, a mom-and-pop shop, to big enterprise-style businesses. You know, anything in the mall. Pretty much anywhere that accepts a credit card, this is going to be a problem.
Now, this is interesting because if you go back, say, 15, 20 years in point of sales, the terminals were very, very simple. They typically had a phone connection that they would dial in order to be able to verify a transaction. And that wasn't the most secure thing, but it means that it didn't have to touch the network. So many point-of-sale devices today go through whatever network connection might be available, which does ease the installation. It makes it easier to put in a point-of-sale system, but it also makes it more attractive to exploitation. Why is that? Why are contemporary point-of-sale systems more vulnerable?
The primary reason is security is usually an afterthought in these installations. So the primary usage of these things is to process as many customers as you can get through as quickly as possible, as you can, as efficiently as you can. You don't want customers waiting there while your PC or your point of sale system is dialing a phone number, waiting for the connection, authenticating, things like that. You can go over your high-speed internet that you have for your business, and that connection goes much faster. So you can get through more customers, and your profits can then go up.
Right, exactly. And actually, we have HighWeb in the chat room who is saying, wait, PCI compliance. And PCI compliance is the magic term. It's, well, no, our business is PCI compliant, therefore we're taking care of your customer data. We learned over the last 18 months that PCI compliance is actually bumpkus. There's nothing. Tell us about PCI compliance and when did we stop believing in it?
I think when we really stopped believing it is when we started seeing these high-profile retail breaches. Problem is, compliance gets you part of the way, but it's not the complete solution. So even though you are compliant, you are doing the right steps, a lot of times that's the minimum effort that people do. So what the problem is the attackers, these cyber criminals, they know that the PCI standards are public domain, so they know exactly what you are doing to secure your point of sale devices, and they know what those gaps are. So they know how to actually get in there and exploit those.
Well, we're going to have to come back to that in a bit, because actually that's a very important point, which is we all know that the PCI standards now are laughable. In fact, Home Depot and Target, when they were violated, were technically both PCI compliant. So it doesn't do a whole lot of good for you. Let me ask you this. What's the typical infection route for someone trying to attack a point of sale system through an SMB network?
More often than not, it's probably going to be phishing. That's usually the common attack vector, regardless if it's point of sale or not. It's so easy to get people to click on links. People are very curious by nature. So that's usually what they're going to try to do. Another common effort is people are connecting these things directly to the internet. So when that is connected to the internet, you have services like Showdown, where you can just find a point of sale type device. And then at that point, you're just a victim of circumstance. You're not specifically targeted because you're a retailer, or you have a point of sale device, or you have customers that they want data out of. You're just, you're putting all of your goods on the network, and that's not really a good thing.
Whoa, hold on, back up. There are retailers who are actually putting the POS system, so not a router, but the POS system itself is accessible via the internet.
Absolutely, yeah, you see that.
Okay, that's. When we bring Chee in, he's probably going to have some very bad words to say about that, because that sounds like it shouldn't happen. I mean, that sounds like even the most IT ignorant person should understand that's a system you can't direct connect to the internet. But you're saying that happens all the time.
Yeah, it does. And, especially when you talk about SMB markets, these aren't typically IT savvy people setting up these networks. They just want it to work, right? So they're following documentation, standards as, this is the quickest way you can get up and running, right? So that's what they're going to do, right? They don't know any better.
Right. And actually, HighWeb is, he's saying POS aren't on shared networks, or they shouldn't be on shared. Right now, our chat room is going a little crazy. There's some people in there who deal with POS systems, and yeah, they're not so happy about this. Let's talk about, let's bring this down from the ivory tower. There actually is a very good example, a recent example of this kind of exploit, of using lax security on a non-enterprise class network, on one that does not have good policy, which then did allow an attacker to take a look at a POS system, and that was at Wendy's. I know there's not a lot of details, but can you talk a little bit about what we know about the Wendy's POS exploit?
There's actually not that we know a lot right now, right? So we just know that they have been breached and credit card data has been found. So the way a lot of these breaches work, the way that we find out about them is reviewing credit card transactions and fraudulent transactions. And, this is just a lot of data. We do big data analysis on it, and we figured out that there was a lot of fraudulent charges that people, the shared experience among those credit cards is that they went to a certain retailer. So in this case, it was Wendy's, right? So that's the same way we find out about things like Target and Home Depot and all these mega breaches that we see. So that's how we find out about it. The problem is right now, especially, it's an ongoing investigation, so they don't want to release that type of data. And even after it's the investigation's closed up, you don't really get that data out, right? So these are private companies. They don't want their private information out there. They don't want their, network architecture talked about on the internet so they can be a target again. So that's really a problem. It's really very difficult to figure out how these things happen.
Travis, we're going to have people who might just drive by on this show. They're looking at PCI compliant solutions for their kiosk, and they don't have an IT department. In fact, they might be their IT department, and they may know actually very little about a point of sale system other than the fact that it says, well, as long as you can get a Wi-Fi connection, you've got a secure transaction route. What is their touchstone? What's their guiding light? Because, as we said, if PCI compliance is no longer meaningful, if it no longer can protect a vendor from exposing his or her customer data, what is suggested by security firms like Tripwire to secure a POS?
Right. I don't exactly completely agree that PCI isn't going to protect a network, right? So I mean, it does do a lot of it does more good than bad, I would say, but definitely on the short term, the number one thing that retailers can do, small all the way up to big enterprise systems, is get those point of sale devices off of your corporate network or any other type of network. Put these on their own segment. So these should not be talking to anything else in your network. and have very limited, if any, internet connection.
Have you seen at all anything in the wild, any advanced persistent threats that sit on a network and specifically look for POS systems?
Yeah, they're out there. They're a lot more targeted, and they're custom built. So, that's kind of what we saw with the Target breach, where they got in through a different network segment. Target did a good job of that. Their POS network was on a separate, completely network, so they did everything right. But then they still found a way in, right? So there are ways that you can get around that without having those network connections, and that's why it's defense in depth is what we're really trying to get at with these types of things.
That's interesting, because I've always wondered how to take that, because on one side you say, look, this wasn't a script kiddie just running Metasploit and a bunch of modules and found a way in. This was actually a targeted attack. So it was a skilled exploiter, a black hat, who knew what to look for and knew how to try to progress through a network. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because I never know. You're not just attacking. You're not defending against random attacks. Someone actually has to come at you in order to work their way through a network. Do you consider that good news or bad?
Both, I guess, right? So there are always going to be instances where you're going to be targeted. So especially when you're a larger company like Target, or when you're making millions of transactions a day, and that's a lot of information. And it's very valuable information, right? Data is the new currency. So if you can get at that data, you are going to be targeted. The more data you have, specifically data that you can reuse as easily as credit card information. Right. So the fact that you have this stuff and you can do this defense in depth, that's good for us. It's bad for the attackers, but there's always ways in. There's always a way you can get in there.
Let me ask you this, and this is something I know Cheebert is chomping at the bit to ask, so we'll get to him right after the next ad. But I like that sentence of data is the new currency. And when we think of attacks, most of the time we focus on things like financial attacks, or more recently we've been looking at violations of patient information and medical information. What's the next arena? Because as you mentioned, any data can be valuable, and they're going to go for the low-hanging fruit. So now that patient information is starting to be protected a bit more, and now that financial point-of-sale systems are getting a little bit of attention, at some point I'm assuming they're going to jump to the next easily breachable system. Do you have any analytics on what that next system might be? What's the next lowest-hanging fruit?
That's really tough to say, right? So getting credit card data is just so incredibly easy, whether you're in person and you could do skimming, or you're doing more advanced things like memory scraping to get credit card data off of point-of-sale systems. That really is the low-hanging fruit right now, and retailers from SMBs up to enterprises are struggling with this. We see these types of breaches every day. So until we as defenders can shore up that type of attack, and we can prevent it a lot more efficiently than we are now, it's going to be difficult to say what the attackers are going to target next, right? So it's going to be some piece of data, right? So credit card data is what we have now. We saw the OPM breach where they went after healthcare information, and they're just really gathering data. And what historically the value of that data is just reselling it or dumping it as quickly as you can. So once you get these credit cards, you want to sell them as quickly as you can before people are notified that their credit card has been stolen, because once they realize that they've been stolen, they can get a new credit card number, and those credit card numbers are no longer valid. So data is really going to be what they're going to gather. They're going to gather that data. Instead of reselling it, they're going to package it up and resell it as themselves. So we're going to see hackers creating their own markets on the underground and building a business model around the data that they can collect.
That's actually really scary. I mean, when you think of it that way, yeah, the financial data, that's easy. I mean, once you get breached, you change that information, no problem. The scarier part is when they do start going for those other low-hanging fruit, and they gather not financial information, but they gather personally identifiable information, enough to steal an identity or enough to actually do damage with, not through a credit card or bank account. So, yeah. You know what? I want to bring my co-host back in. We're gonna speak with Lou. We're going to speak with Cheebert, because I'm sure they've got their 10 cents they want to throw into this conversation. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank the last sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's ZipRecruiter. Now, let me ask you, are you the hiring manager for your company, or are you responsible for bringing new talent into your team? Because I got to say, folks, that's what's going to determine the success or failure of your business. The people that you bring on, the talent that you bring into your company will give you the next great idea, will give you the next great push, will give you the next great campaign. And if you don't hire the right people, it can be equally disastrous. Now, ZipRecruiter understands that. And so what they want to do is they want to give you an easy way to post to as many job boards as possible with a single click. Thanks to ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100+ job sites with that single click, and you can be instantly matched to candidates from over 6 million resumes. Now, just listen to Dan. He's an actual ZipRecruiter client, and he wrote, and I quote, "The hardest thing about running a business when you need to hire is that you have to spend extra time recruiting while you're short-staffed. But with ZipRecruiter, I've gotten quality candidates within 24 hours of posting a job. ZipRecruiter's website makes this process so much faster by letting me manage candidates in one place," unquote. Now, just post once, and within 24 hours, you can watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. You can look at them by their skill level and, most importantly, at least for me, by their cultural fit. Will they fit into your company? Do they understand the way you want to work? Do they have your next big idea? Now, ZipRecruiter has been used by over 400,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Getting the right people for your company is so important. Do you really want to leave it up to chance? Now, today, you can try ZipRecruiter for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. I want to bring in Chee first because I know that he's, I can watch him on this monitor and he's just going. So he's having a bit of a fit. Chee, do you have no strong feelings about PCI and HIPAA compliance?
Oh, no. I personally think most of these government regulations are people up on an ivory tower saying thou shalt do this and thou shalt do that, but they absolutely positively have not put anything in there to specify or even allude to a level of security or a level of compliance or a level of auditing. They just give you the 10,000-foot view, broad strokes, and that's it. So I've done several PCI and PCI 2 audits for various organizations within the University of Hawaii, and I have actually taken the time and sat down and read the PCI regulations and have been absolutely flabbergasted. The reality is that Super El Cheapo 10-year-old Linksys firewall actually meets PCI compliance because it can block ports. Just because some script kiddie has managed to get into there and put man-in-the-middle attack still keeps it PCI compliant, which is driving me absolutely out of my mind. So my personal opinion is the implementation is what's more important than the so-called PCI compliance. I've done several restaurants now, and the unfortunate fact of life is too many of these value-added resellers, especially in the point-of-sale world, think an El Cheapo home router is good enough, and it just isn't, because it is a piece of crap. It's running on, in some cases, a decade-old version of Linux. It is Dan Gear's worst nightmare that we're extending the attack surface out to the edge, and we are actually helping the hackers get in and get at our financial data because these people are not implementing in good faith. And I think that's going to be my new buzzword. Do the value-added resellers really and truly implement in good faith? And my opinion is they are not. They do not have people that have the right skills. They do not have people that even think about security until the very last minute. And they have actually, in some cases, really reduced the security of the restaurant networks that I have put together because they poke big giant holes in them with crappy firewalls. And this is a big problem. And I don't think the industry is going to survive if they don't get their head out of the sand and start doing something real instead of these slapdash 50-cent fixes that don't do anything but hurt.
Travis, as you can see, my co-host really has no strong feelings about this issue either way. But perhaps we can push it upon you. One of the things I've heard Chee say the last time we covered PCI compliance is PCI compliance is important to retailers in such that as long as they're PCI compliance, it shifts the blame to the payment processor rather than to them. And so it is useful in that sense, but not really much more than that, right? Because as Chee said, then we actually have a case of this. You can have an owned router and still be PCI compliant which just means that you're not protecting your customer data, but at least you're not responsible for losing it.
That's true. When it comes at the end of the day, it's really a business is in business to make money, right? So if they can, shift any responsibility, especially financial responsibility, to somebody else, then absolutely they're going to do it, right? So as a business owner, that's what makes sense. But they need to understand that there's more to the survival of your business than shifting financial responsibility of a breach to a third party, right? So there's more than just the fines that go along with it, lost data, things like that. There's, a PR nightmare that comes along, and, the reputation that goes along, the reputation hit that goes along with losing customer data is huge. We see, especially publicly traded companies that have these types of breaches, that their stocks just tank, maybe even momentarily, but that's still a real financial hit to real people in the world.
I want to bring in Lou here because Lou might be able to offer us some unique perspective. Lou, of course, you work with Microsoft CRM, which does manage customer information, and I believe you've got hooks into Microsoft's Dynamics and RMS, which does do point-of-sale work. Tell us, what's the way that Microsoft has chosen to protect POS?
So with RMS, you can install it pretty much on any device. So that's kind of the key here is you had the installers and the partners that actually have customers install that service. They need to make sure that they're putting it on devices that don't necessarily are going to be able to leak that information, or like you said, have public internet access, or public Wi-Fi access, that kind of thing. I mean, I have seen retailers, Apple Store is one of them, that will put it on devices that even have internet access on the device. So I mean, you're kind of pushing the realms there at some point. With Dynamic CRM, it's a little different. There's many different offerings. There's an on-prem offering, obviously, that's only secure as your network is secure. And of course, then there's also CRM Online, which is, that Microsoft obviously takes serious the securing your data. So I think a lot of times, it all depends on, what type of device you're on and if it's been breached or not. So again, these types of things are important when it comes to installation. You're only really as good as your installation, I guess you could say. Sometimes the software can do only so much, unless you're using a separate device that only does that, and it's on a closed network, and the data is not over the public Wi-Fi. So I think it's all dependent on really the installation type.
Okay, so Travis, what about that? I mean, Lou, obviously he's a software guy. I mean, that's where he makes his bread and butter. That's his expertise. And so a software person is going to see the solutions from a software perspective. When you look at the problem, when you look at the securing POS, where do you see? I mean, obviously it must be a multi-pronged approach, but where do you see the solution?
Software is always going to be the easiest and best solution. It's always going to be the cheapest solution, especially if you try to bring in hardware and things like that. These point-of-sale systems, most commonly, we are seeing that they're running some variation of a Windows operating system. So Microsoft has done a lot, and they have a lot of available tools that are built into these operating systems that you can secure them. Things like App Locker, right? If you have App Locker on your point-of-sale device and it's enabled, you're not going to get infected by a lot of these point-of-sale devices. And there's, third-party vendors, people like Tripwire, right? And we sell, these whole solutions around securing these point-of-sale things that are all software-based. Software is a very good solution to secure this type of problem.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, unfortunately, we are running out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid you've used up another hour listening to the best dang podcast, enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 point-of-sale systems. But I do want to get some final words here because we all have our little bits of expertise in retail. Cheebert, obviously, he set up a lot of networks which have been abused. Lou actually helps to write the software. And Travis, you work in the industry that helps to secure it. Final words on securing POS, things that you would suggest that our listeners, if they're interested in this topic, that they go to check out. Cheebert, let's start with you.
My biggest advice is you get what you pay for. If you're going to put in a cheapy firewall, and I mean anything under $200 is a cheapy firewall, you're going to get exactly what you just paid for. My recommendation is spend the money, get a real network value-added reseller in there, zone off your point of sale. Your point of sale should not live with your administration network. It should not live with your shipping network. It should not have crossovers. There should be some very, very restrictive rules. on what data can flow back and forth and what data can come in from the outside world. Get a real network value-added reseller. Do it right. You'll not regret it.
Okay, so Chee gives us the hardware/policy side of the solution. Lou, what do you got?
I think Chee hit it. I think it's you got to spend the extra money so you can buy software from partners who will sell you software and hardware solutions the same. I suggest buy the hardware from a separate vendor that's going to know how to secure it. Make sure that they do secure it. Spend the extra dough on that. Then have somebody come in and install the software on the new hardware, and of course make sure that vendor can also produce a more secure environment. And sometimes, what I recommend, especially stores who are, large stores that people are going to be walking around, try to stay away from some of those Wi-Fi devices that you can actually install the RMS units on. But other than that, stick with the paying the extra cost and separating the two because you'll get better benefit out of it.
Okay, Travis. So my co-hosts have some good advice, which is basically don't cheap out when you're trying to secure information. But what can you offer us? What further resources should our audience go to if they're looking at securing POS in their networks?
All right, so I'm going to go on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. So instead of spending money, I'm going to offer some free solutions. So number one, I think we've already said it, is get these devices off of the same network, right? So you can do that with probably existing equipment that you have. Number two is there's a lot of open source tools that you can use to your advantage to protect or detect these types of attacks and a lot of these common attacks. If you look at something like Bro IDS, that's free, highly valuable, that has open source threat intelligence integrations with it, very powerful, very easy to use, very easy to set up. And number two is, if you can, is just block these things down from change. These are very static environments, specifically on the devices. You should be monitoring for change, preventing change any way that you can.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been a fascinating discussion. And actually, it's an important discussion. It's one that we're going to bring back time and time again. Actually, Travis, I'd like to invite you back at some point because we do want to do a special, a PCI compliance / HIPAA compliance special at some point in the near future. Would you be willing to be part of a panel of, say, 3 or 4 guests who can speak intelligently to the issues concerned?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gentlemen, again, thank you very much for being part of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. I want to give you all your plug time. Travis, let's start with you. We've had Tripwire on the show many, many times. In fact, I think this is the 8th appearance of a Tripwire representative. We love you guys. We bring you back time and time again because you like to clarify what's happening in the enterprise security world. Can you tell us about Tripwire? Can you tell us where they can find your products and where they can find you?
Absolutely. So obviously you can find us on, we're heavily on the web, tripwire.com. We're on Twitter and all these things. And we have our blog, the State of Security blog. You can go to tripwire.com/blog. Constant posts, multiple posts per day of not only very rarely Tripwire-centered posts, more about industry security posts. So that's where you can get a lot of the information. I post a lot of my research on there as well. Tripwire, we were really known for PCI compliance. That's what made us famous in the early 2000s. We've been around since the 90s, and we started as an open source research project in a university, and now we're, just recently got bought out, and we're part of a $2.5 billion conglomerate. So, we do a lot around security, especially my research has been a lot around point of sale research. So I've done a lot of information and, a lot of research into how to secure these things, what are the common attack vectors. And so, we have our white papers out of what these vectors are and how you can secure yourself.
Fantastic. Again, that's Travis Smith. He's a senior security research engineer with Tripwire. We thank you for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech, and we will welcome you back in the future.
Thank you.
Of course, I've got my co-host, and remember, we've got a rotating schedule now, so we're trying to take 2 of the 3 at any given time. Let's start with you, Lou, because it's always a pleasure to have you back. You were my co-host on Coding 101. You've been on Twiet as a guest in the first month of Twiet, actually, so you do have a lineage here. Could you tell the folks at home where they can find you?
Absolutely. You can always find me on Twitter at LouMM. And of course, all the work that I do, you guys mentioned the Dynamics CRM for Microsoft is found at crm.dynamics.com.
Fantastic. And Chee, I know that you're sick right now, and hopefully you're doing what you need to do to get well. But you also have some interesting geek-tacular events going on. What will the Geek in Paradise be working on?
The Geek in Paradise is going to be taking part in Geek Week at Leeward Community College coming up later this month. I'm also going to be lighting up an embedded systems class called Oceanography 318. We're going to teach the students how to build open source science instrumentation. And if all goes well, I'm actually going to kick this stupid sinus infection and, get back to normal.
Fantastic. Cheebert, Lou, always a pleasure. And we'll see you again on another episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Folks, that does it. I do want to thank you very much for joining us because we don't have a show without you. We can't come back every single week to give you all the enterprise goodness that we can find unless you continue to subscribe, watch, and download our episodes. We want to give you an easy way to do it. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiet. While you're there, you'll be able to find all of our back episodes, everything that we've done in the past, as well as subscribe so you can get every episode in the format that you want into your device of choice. Again, just go to twit.tv/Twiet. Also, don't forget that you can find me on Twitter at PadreSJ. If you follow me there, you'll be able to find out what we're going to be doing for every episode of Twiet, and you'll be able to talk to me about who you want and what topics you want for future episodes. We actually do pull a lot of our topics straight from the suggestions of the Twiet Riot. Don't forget, we do this show every Friday, or at least most Fridays when we're not pre-recorded, at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Just go to live.twit.tv and you can watch the full show. That includes the pre-show, the post-show, everything in between, including all the little bloopers that get cut out of the finished episode. If you want to experiment with us and see what Twit TV is all about, and that is bringing you how the sausage is made, just go to live.twit.tv. As long as you're watching us live, jump into our chat room at irc.twit.tv, and you'll be able to converse with all of the hosts and the guests. In fact, I've got a little screen right down here that allows you to see and speak with me as the show goes on. One last note, there is actually a Twit newsletter available for you right now. Just go to twit.tv/newsletter. If you go there and subscribe, you'll get all the news about what's going to be happening every week of Twit TV. Again, that's twit.tv/newsletter. Again, thanks to everyone who makes this show possible, to Lisa and Leo, of course, to Carson, my super producer, and today to Kara, or as we like to call her, Kara. Kara, thank you very much for being my TD today. I'm not sure if you have a camera on yourself.
I do. I've learned how to do that now.
Yeah, there you go. Can you tell the folks what you do here at Twit TV?
I do most of the handheld camera work for new screensavers and any out-of-studio productions that we have. And I'm also learning to technical direct, obviously, and I'm getting better. I feel good. You are getting much better. Soon we will just kick Brian out of that seat because, we want the best year. I'm ready for that. Yeah. Folks, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you again. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the Digital Jesuit, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.